Imagine opening your computer and realizing that the familiar boundaries you've lived with for decades have quietly dissolved. The icons, the menus, the subtle expectations about what a desktop operating system is supposed to be all start to feel like relics from another era. That is the strange and fascinating place Linux has reached. For years, it was the underdog, the system for enthusiasts, developers, and tinkerers who enjoyed control more than convenience. But now it has crossed a line that Windows, despite its dominance and enormous resources, simply cannot follow without changing its entire identity. The shift isn't about market share or flashy marketing. It's about philosophy, flexibility, and the very definition of ownership over your own machine. For the longest time, Linux lived in the shadows of Windows. It was known as the system that required command lines, cryptic commands, and endless troubleshooting. Many people associated it with complexity and elitism, as if it were a club you had to earn entry into. Meanwhile, Windows positioned itself as the universal default, the system that just worked for the majority of people. But as the years rolled on, something subtle happened. Linux stopped trying to mimic Windows and instead refined its own identity. Distributions became more polished, desktop environments more intuitive, and installation processes smoother than ever. The community stopped chasing compatibility as its only goal and started building experiences that were genuinely unique rather than derivative. The turning point wasn't a single release or a revolutionary feature. It was a gradual accumulation of small victories that, together, changed the narrative. Gaming support improved dramatically with compatibility layers that allowed thousands of titles to run effortlessly. Hardware support became broader and more reliable, thanks to manufacturers slowly recognizing the value of open ecosystems. User interfaces evolved into visually stunning environments that rivaled or even surpassed commercial operating systems in fluidity and design. The idea that Linux was only for programmers began to fade, replaced by the realization that it could be for anyone who wanted control without sacrificing usability. What truly sets Linux apart now is not just what it can do, but what it refuses to do. It does not insist on forced updates at inconvenient times. It does not embed advertising into the operating system. It does not tie your experience to a single account or ecosystem in a way that feels inescapable. Instead, it offers choice at every level. You can choose your desktop environment, your package manager, your file system, even your kernel if you are adventurous enough. This level of customization is not a gimmick. It is a structural principle. Windows, by contrast, is built around consistency and centralized control. Its strength lies in uniformity, but that same strength becomes a limitation when users demand deeper autonomy. Another line Linux has crossed is performance efficiency. Modern Linux distributions can run smoothly on hardware that Windows left behind years ago. Old laptops gain new life. Lightweight machines become surprisingly powerful, and resource usage often feels minimal compared to heavier operating systems. This is not merely about nostalgia or recycling old hardware. It is about accessibility. In regions where high-end computers are a luxury, Linux provides an entry point into modern computing without financial strain. Windows cannot easily follow here because its ecosystem is deeply intertwined with hardware partnerships, licensing models, and a business structure that depends on continuous upgrades. Security is another dimension where Linux has quietly advanced beyond expectations. The permission models, open source transparency, and rapid patch cycles contribute to a sense of resilience that many users now value more than ever. Instead of relying solely on corporate assurances, users can inspect the code, trust community scrutiny, and apply fixes almost immediately. While no system is invulnerable, the culture surrounding Linux encourages proactive awareness rather than passive dependence. Windows, with its massive user base, inevitably becomes a prime target for widespread threats, and although it invests heavily in security, it also carries the weight of legacy systems and compatibility constraints that slow radical change. Perhaps the most profound transformation lies in how Linux redefines ownership. On Linux, the machine truly feels like yours. You can modify it, reshape it, or strip it down to its essentials without asking permission from a centralized authority. This sense of agency is deeply appealing in an era where software increasingly behaves like a service rather than a product. Windows, by design, is moving toward tighter integration with cloud services, subscriptions, and account-based features. For many users, this is convenient, but for others, it feels like a gradual erosion of independence. Linux stands on the opposite side of that spectrum, offering an experience where the user is not just a consumer, but a participant. The community aspect also plays a critical role in why Linux has crossed this line. Development is not confined to a single corporation or a closed team. Thousands of contributors across the world shape its evolution, propose features, fix bugs, and build tools. This collaborative energy creates diversity in solutions, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. When a need arises, someone somewhere is already experimenting with a solution. This decentralized innovation moves quickly and unpredictably, often outpacing traditional corporate roadmaps. Windows, bound by corporate structure and long-term planning cycles, cannot replicate this organic growth without abandoning the very framework that makes it profitable and stable. User experience has also matured in ways that were once unimaginable. Desktop environments now offer animations, gestures, and design languages that feel modern and cohesive. Installation wizards guide newcomers with clarity. App stores provide curated software libraries, and system settings panels rival the polish of commercial competitors. The narrative that Linux is difficult to use becomes increasingly outdated as more users discover that they can install it, customize it, and maintain it with minimal friction. The barrier to entry has lowered dramatically, yet the ceiling for advanced control remains infinitely high, creating a rare balance between simplicity and depth. Another reason Linux has stepped beyond a threshold Windows cannot easily cross is its adaptability across devices and use cases. The same kernel powers servers, supercomputers, embedded systems, smartphones, and desktops. This universality fosters a consistent development environment that spans industries and scales effortlessly. Developers can move from writing code on a laptop to deploying it on massive infrastructures without changing foundational tools. Windows, while versatile in its own right, is not as seamlessly embedded across such a wide spectrum of technology. Linux's presence behind the scenes of the Internet itself gives it an invisible authority that most users never directly notice but constantly benefit from. The economic implications are equally significant. Linux eliminates licensing fees, encourages reuse of hardware, and supports open standards that reduce vendor lock-in. Organizations can deploy large networks without worrying about escalating costs tied to proprietary software. Educational institutions, startups, and independent creators gain opportunities that might otherwise be financially prohibitive. Windows, structured around licensing and commercial partnerships, cannot abandon its revenue model without redefining its entire existence. This difference is not just technical, it is philosophical and economic, shaping how each platform evolves. Culturally, Linux represents a different mindset about technology. It invites curiosity rather than discouraging it. Users are encouraged to learn how their systems work, to explore configurations, to participate in communities where knowledge is shared freely. This fosters a deeper relationship between people and their machines. Windows often emphasizes convenience and abstraction, which benefits many users, but also distances them from understanding the underlying mechanics. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but they serve different audiences and priorities. The line Linux has crossed is the point where empowerment becomes the central value rather than a secondary feature. The rise of privacy awareness has further amplified Linux's appeal. As digital lives become more intertwined with personal data, people increasingly question how much control they truly have over their information. Linux distributions typically avoid mandatory telemetry, offer transparent privacy policies, and allow users to disable or modify almost any data collecting feature. This transparency builds trust among users who are cautious about surveillance and data monetization. Windows, integrated with a broader ecosystem of services and analytics, finds it harder to detach from data-driven strategies that sustain its business infrastructure. Even creativity and experimentation thrive differently on Linux. Developers can build entirely new desktop environments, package systems, or distributions without seeking approval from a central authority. This freedom results in an ever-expanding landscape of options, from minimalistic systems designed for speed to visually elaborate ones focused on aesthetics. Users can treat their operating system as a canvas rather than a fixed template. Windows, optimized for consistency across millions of machines, cannot easily encourage such fragmentation without compromising compatibility and support structures. What makes this moment particularly compelling is that Linux did not achieve this transformation through aggressive marketing or forced adoption. It evolved through persistence, community collaboration, and a steady refinement of purpose. People who once dismissed it now find themselves reconsidering, not because they were convinced by advertisements, but because the practical advantages have become too significant to ignore. The shift is quiet yet profound, like a tide rising gradually until it reshapes the shoreline. In the end, the line Linux has crossed is not about defeating Windows or replacing it entirely. It is about reaching a stage where it no longer needs to compare itself. It stands as a fully realized alternative with its own strengths, values, and identity. Windows remains powerful, widely used, and deeply integrated into countless workflows. But its path is bound to corporate structures and legacy commitments that limit how radically it can change. Linux, driven by openness and adaptability, moves with fewer constraints and greater fluidity. This divergence marks a new era in personal computing, where the definition of success is no longer measured solely by market dominance, but by the freedom, transparency, and empowerment offered to those who choose to step beyond the familiar and explore what lies on the other side of that line.